Close your eyes for a moment and go back in time. It is a Friday night in 1999. You are walking across a parking lot, and ahead of you shines a beacon of blue and yellow light. The automatic doors slide open, and you are hit with that distinct, indescribable smell, a mix of carpet cleaner, popcorn, and plastic cases. You are at Blockbuster Video. For a generation, this wasn't just a store, it was a cultural ritual. It was the place where dates were planned, where families negotiated over which comedy to watch, and where you hoped desperately that the new release wall hadn't been picked clean. It's easy to look back now with rose-colored glasses, remembering the tactile joy of browsing the aisles, holding the physical box in your hand, and buying a tub of overpriced candy at the counter. But beneath that nostalgia lies a brutal reality. At its peak, Blockbuster was a titan, a colossus of home entertainment that seemed absolutely invincible. We are talking about an empire that by 2004 had over 9,000 stores scattered across the globe. They employed an army of over 84,000 people. They were on every street corner, in every strip mall, dominating the landscape of how the world consumed movies. They had the capital, the infrastructure, and the brand recognition that most companies only dream of. Yet within a single decade, this massive kingdom would crumble into dust. It didn't happen because of a natural disaster or a sudden war. It happened because of a series of choices. Arrogance, complacency, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the future led them to dig their own grave. Tonight, we are going to unravel the epic failure of Blockbuster Video. We will look at how they built a throne on the backs of angry customers, how they laughed in the face of the one company that could have saved them, and how a $60 billion industry shifted beneath their feet while they stood still. This is the story of how Blockbuster ignored the future until the future erased. The year is 2000. We're in the midst of the dot-com bubble burst. Tech stocks are crashing, investors are fleeing, and the newly founded Netflix is bleeding money. They are struggling to acquire customers, and the cost of shipping DVDs is eating them alive. Reed Hastings and Marc Randolph needed a lifeline. They looked at the landscape and decided to approach the giant. They secured a meeting with Blockbuster's leadership in Dallas, Texas. The proposal was straightforward and, in hindsight, brilliantly simple. Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for $50 million. In exchange, Netflix would take over and run Blockbuster's online presence. They would become the digital arm of the video store empire. Imagine that partnership, the physical dominance of Blockbuster combined with the logistical genius and online interface of Netflix. It would have created an unstoppable monopoly on home entertainment. But the meeting did not go as planned. According to accounts from those in the room, the atmosphere was tense. The Blockbuster executives, led by CEO John Antioco, were impeccably dressed in expensive suits, sitting in a high-rise office that screamed corporate power. The Netflix founders were the scrappy underdogs. When Hastings named the price, $50 million, the room went quiet. And then the unthinkable happened. John Antioco smiled, and then he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle, it was a dismissal. They laughed them out of the office. To Blockbusters, the idea was ludicrous. Why would they pay $50 million for a niche mail-order service that was losing money? They had thousands of stores. They had the customers. They believed that the internet was overhyped and that people would always want to drive to a store to pick up a movie. They saw Netflix not as a visionary company, but as a pest that they could stomp out whenever they chose. That laughter is now recorded as one of the most expensive mistakes in the history of capitalism. Blockbuster walked away from the deal, confident in their brick-and-mortar fortress. They didn't realize that they had just declined to buy the future for pennies on the dollar. They returned to their strategy of opening more stores and collecting more late fees, completely oblivious to the fact that the fuse had already been lit on the dynamite that would destroy algorithms that kept users hooked. They refined their distribution centers so that DVDs arrived faster. They were innovating every single day. Blockbuster, on the other hand, was stuck. They were anchored to their real estate. When they finally realized that online rentals were a threat, it was already 2004. 4 years had passed since the meeting. In the tech world, 4 years is a lifetime. Blockbuster finally launched Blockbuster Online, but they were playing catch-up. They were running a race that Netflix had already been leading for miles. In 2006, Blockbuster tried a desperate maneuver called Total Access. This program allowed customers to rent DVDs online and then return them in-store to exchange for a free movie. For the customer, it was amazing. It actually gave Blockbuster an edge, bridging the digital and physical worlds. But financially, it was a disaster. Every time a customer exchanged a movie, Blockbuster lost about $2. They were bleeding cash to fight a war of attrition they couldn't afford. To make matters worse, internal chaos plagued the company. Activist investor Carl Icahn began a campaign against the leadership. The end came with brutal swiftness. By 2010, the writing was not just on the wall, it was written in eviction notices and foreclosure signs. Blockbuster, the company that had once laughed at a $50 million buyout, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They were buried under nearly $1 billion in debt. The world had moved on. Customers who had once flocked to the stores on Friday nights were now sitting on their couches, scrolling through Netflix's endless library. Dish Network stepped in to buy the remaining assets for $320 million in 2011, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage, but it was too late. The brand was dead. The stores began to close, thousands at a time. The blue and yellow signs were taken down, leaving faded outlines on building facades across America, ghostly reminders of an era that had passed. By January 2014, the corporate-owned stores were gone. The DVD by mail service that Blockbuster had tried to The end came with brutal swiftness. By 2010, the writing was not just on the wall, it was written in eviction notices and foreclosure signs. Blockbuster, the company that had once laughed at a $50 million buyout, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They were buried under nearly $1 billion in debt. The world had moved on. Customers who had once flocked to the stores on Friday nights were now sitting on their couches, scrolling through Netflix's endless library. Dish Network stepped in to buy the remaining assets for $320 million in 2011, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage, but it was too late. The brand was dead. The stores began to close, thousands at a time. The blue and yellow signs were taken down, leaving faded outlines on building facades across America, ghostly reminders of an era that had passed. By January 2014, the corporate-owned stores were gone. The DVD by mail service that Blockbuster had tried to copy ceased operations. The giant had fallen. But there's a strange poetic footnote to this story. Today, if you travel to Bend, Oregon, you will find the very last Blockbuster on Earth. It is an independently owned franchise that managed to outlive the corporate collapse. It stands there today not as a business competitor, but as a tourist attraction, a museum. People travel from all over just to walk through those doors, to smell that popcorn smell, and to hold a plastic DVD case in their hands one last time. It serves as a nostalgic relic, a time capsule of the 1990s. But more importantly, it stands as a monument to a colossal failure of vision. It is a reminder to every CEO, every entrepreneur, and every business leader. Success is not permanent. When the world changes, you have two choices. You can adapt or you can die. Blockbuster chose to ignore the changing tides. They chose to protect their late fees rather than serve their customers. They chose arrogance over innovation, and because of that, the only place you can find them now is in a small town in Oregon or in history books, listed under cautionary tales.